On a deep winter night, in a desolate white expanse of snow, a young man named Jack was walking alone, bewildered. He was a young American, standing at a complex crossroads in life. Job instability, relationship turmoil, and a sense of emptiness about the future were all pulling him toward a quiet, peaceful place. Little did he know that very winter night would mark the beginning of an eerie chapter in his life, one that would confront him with the most terrifying experience he'd ever face. The snowstorm had begun since evening. A light bag hung on his shoulder, and old winter boots were on his feet. As he walked, he stumbled upon an old, abandoned train station that seemed to have been out of use for years. There was a profound silence, yet an unusual pull kept him from walking away. Questions swirled in his mind. Where had the train come from? Why was it standing there? But his feet, as if on their own, took him closer. Suddenly, a sound reached his ears, the shrill whistle of an old train. The doors were open, signaling him to enter. There were no passengers or staff, yet an unknown force seemed to draw him in. In the suffocating cold, when Jack boarded the train, he thought it might be a normal journey, but from everything he had ever known, this journey would prove anything but ordinary. The deep silence of the winter night was shattered once again by the shrill whistle of an old train. Amidst the sound of the storm and the soft whisper of the snowflakes, that sound seemed to call from another world. Jack froze, and after a moment's hesitation, his feet moved toward the train. The door was slightly ajar, but there were no passengers or staff in sight. An odd chill permeated the air. Something unfamiliar seemed to be pulling him in, drawing him closer. Faint light illuminated the interior of the train. Its color was faded, aged, like something that hadn't been touched in years. The windows were empty, and the sound of the wheels on the tracks echoed with a distant hum. Jack felt a growing unease. But in the midst of the storm, there was no turning back. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but some strange magnetism was urging him into the train. Carefully, he opened the door and placed one foot inside. Immediately, a heavy sound followed, as though the entire train let out a long, deep breath. The interior was dark, lit only by a few dim flashes of light. As soon as Jack stepped in, the door silently closed behind him. The train, in the suffocating cold, began to move with an unknown purpose. Jack felt a strange sensation creeping over him. There was something else inside the train. A pressure, an indescribable feeling, pulling him deeper. His eyes slowly scanned the passengers. There was no conductor, no familiar faces. But then, an unsettling sight caught his eye. There they were. The passengers, sitting silently in their seats. But their faces were lifeless. Their eyes were vacant, as though they were not present in this world. A chill ran through Jack's spine. His throat went dry, and before he realized it, his hand gripped the train's railing tightly. He knew something was wrong, but he had no power to deny it. There was no going back now. Only one path lay ahead, forward. But the train didn't stop, and even if it did, what would happen then? An eerie thought crept into Jack's mind. Were these passengers alive or dead? Why were they so still, so silent, as if they no longer belonged to this world? In that winter night, the journey into terror had truly begun. The train continued its journey, disappearing into the endless snow. Occasionally a flicker of light illuminated the interior through the train's windows, but all around there was nothing but emptiness. Jack's unease grew with every passing moment, as if something invisible was relentlessly chasing him. After what felt like an eternity, the train suddenly screeched to a halt with a sharp, jarring sound. In that instant, Jack knew something was terribly wrong. Peering through the glass, he saw an old, abandoned station. The platform was made of cracked stone, with decaying buildings and a solitary dim light flickering faintly. The surrounding area was eerily quiet, as if no living creature had ever stepped foot there. Just mounds of snow. Why had the train stopped here? How had it even reached a station? These questions swirled in his mind, adding to his growing confusion. The doors opened slightly, and Jack glanced around at the other passengers. They seemed unbothered, neither concerned nor threatening. Their eyes were empty, cold, as if they had lost all feeling. Yet despite their stillness, they had an odd, unsettling presence. They were looking, but it was as if they were seeing nothing at all. A profound internal emptiness radiated from them, making Jack even more uncomfortable. But his fear was soon drawn elsewhere. Outside, there stood a figure, a person with a twisted, dishevelled appearance, their hair cascading wildly. Jack couldn't tell whether they were alive or dead. He tried to speak, to call out, but no sound came. The presence of that figure was suffocating, creating a silent, overwhelming fear. Then an unbelievable event unfolded. Strange, hollow sounds began emanating from the station. They seemed like an old song or eerie melody reverberating through Jack's mind in an unsettling rhythmic tremor. The sound seemed to vibrate within him, sending chills down his spine. Fear-stricken, Jack realized the train was about to move again. He gripped the railing tightly, his senses screaming that something was about to pull him out of the train, dragging him into the unknown. As the train resumed its journey, Jack turned to look at the platform one last time. The figure who had stood outside was now gone, completely vanished into the dark. The station itself seemed to fade away into nothingness. The train moved on, but that first horrifying encounter left a deep, lingering impression in Jack's mind. Now, a new doubt crept into his thoughts. This train wasn't heading anywhere. It was taking him somewhere much worse, toward his deepest fears. The train continued to move through the darkness, and Jack's anxiety intensified. The experience at the first station had left a deep mark on his mind. The broken, empty station, the mysterious figure, everything seemed to be pulling him towards an unknown force. He had no idea where he was headed or where the train would take him, but there was nothing he could do, as the journey seemed endless, and there was no way to turn back or escape. After a while, the train came to a halt again. This time it was an unusual station, completely different from the last. It felt as though time had stopped here. Outside, Jack saw ruins, ancient stone structures, and strange flickering lights, casting eerie shadows over crumbling statues and broken temples. The air was filled with the haunting sounds of an ancient song, as if the sorrowful wail of a lost soul was echoing through the place. Jack froze. The doors of the train opened, but none of the passengers stepped out. He was the only one, standing alone in the midst of eerie music and the ruins. In the corner of the platform stood an old white stone statue with a grotesque face, 3 eyes, a visage not of a god, but of something far more sinister. The longer Jack stared at the statue, the more he felt as if its eyes were following him. He quickly took a step back, but it seemed as though there was no escape. The feeling of being trapped in this haunting station washed over him, as if the entire world had come to a halt, and he was the only one left behind in this place of horrors. Then, near the broken-down building on the platform, Jack caught sight of a mysterious man. Dressed in a white robe, the man's eyes were completely black, as if some dark force was imprisoned within them. He didn't speak, but his unsettling gaze instantly alerted Jack to the danger surrounding him. Jack tried to move away, to reach the platform's edge, but his feet felt heavy, as if something invisible was pulling him toward the man. In that moment, everything seemed to come alive in flashes. Old music, the sounds of ghostly voices, the ever-present figures of the vanished people. Jack began to realize that this station was trapped in time, a place where lost souls wandered endlessly, caught between life and death. But why? He couldn't understand. Behind him, Jack heard the voice of the strange man. Easy to come here, but leaving is far harder. Jack's heart raced. He knew that if he didn't leave soon, he might never escape. He had to get out of this place. Just then, the train started again, and in a panic, everything faded into the wet darkness once more. The station, along with its haunting presence, disappeared as the train sped off into the unknown, leaving behind only the faintest of marks from the horrifying experience. The train surged forward, as though an invisible force was pulling it towards some destination unknown. Jack's unease and fear deepened with every passing moment. An invisible pressure seemed to weigh on his body, as if the train was not merely transporting him, but carrying him towards some dark and sinister purpose. A deep conviction began to form within him. This was no ordinary train. It was a nightmarish journey, one that was leading him through his past, his fears, or perhaps even toward his death. After what felt like an eternity of relentless motion, the train suddenly came to a screeching halt. The sound of the brakes, the grinding of the wheels, and the harsh friction were deafening. For a moment, everything fell into an eerie stillness. Jack stared out in confusion. Beyond the windows there was nothing but darkness, and it felt as if the train had collided with something, bringing it to an unexpected stop. Then, something horrifying caught his eye. Outside the window, a massive black tunnel stretched out in front of them. The train had somehow entered it, and all around them, an unsettling silence enveloped the space. The darkness within the tunnels seemed to have no end, and as the train moved deeper, a sense of dread filled the air, one that words couldn't adequately describe. Jack couldn't make sense of it, but he knew this was no ordinary tunnel. Something was terribly wrong. Just then, a deafening noise pierced the air, like the sound of the train's wheels tearing from the tracks. A violent jolt followed, and Jack could feel the entire train shaking violently, as if it were plummeting into an abyss. There was the sound of metal scraping, a tremendous crash, and then complete chaos. It felt as if the train had plunged into a deep ravine or a vast submerged lake. Inside, the passengers screamed and wailed, their cries mingling with the cacophony of destruction. The darkness outside was suffocating, and the sounds of wreckage and terror seemed to blend into one horrifying symphony. Jack couldn't see anything. He could only feel the crushing weight of fear pressing against him. He knew he was being drawn into something vast and unknown. His mind raced with a single question. Was this an accident, or was it something far worse? Was this a dark, inevitable future, a moment destined for him alone? Then, in a flash, the train's lights flickered and went out, plunging everything into total darkness. It was then that Jack felt it. A presence. Something invisible, a spirit, or perhaps an entity, moved around him. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it, an oppressive weight in the air, as though his very soul was being held captive. His heart raced, and the thought gnawed at him. Was this the end, or was he trapped in an endless nightmare with no escape? He tried to steady himself, but a strange, otherworldly sensation filled his body. It was as if something was pulling him downward, an unseen force drawing him into an unknown abyss. Despite his resistance, his body felt weak, and he couldn't fight the pull. This wasn't an accident. It was a predetermined, calculated end. A fate that was pulling him into a void of endless darkness. The earth itself had reached out to claim him, but just as his mind was starting to break, a phantom hand grabbed hold of him. The train surged forward, deeper into the darkness, and Jack realized this was only the beginning. The train plunged deeper into an endless abyss, and Jack felt an overwhelming pressure in his chest. This was no ordinary journey. It was a long, relentless march toward death, where there would be no turning back. Every moment seemed to drag him further into a dark world, one where the boundaries of reality and nightmare were blurred. There was no sign of tracks ahead, only darkness, and from that void, strange, eerie sounds emerged. Whispers of lost souls encircling him. Inside the train, a supernatural silence hung in the air. But Jack knew something was about to happen that would change his life forever. He could feel an inner force urging him to make a choice. this was the final moment. Before this journey ended, he had to decide. Standing by the window in the corner of the train, Jack sensed something drawing closer. An invisible power, a terrifying presence, was pushing him to make a decision. It suddenly occurred to him. Could his existence in this nightmare have meaning? Or was it simply an endless agony closing in on him? Then, in the middle of the train, an apparition appeared. A shadow, its face unrecognizable, but its eyes filled with unsettling turmoil and profound sorrow. The shadow moved toward Jack, and as its faint voice reached his ears, he realized it was his own spirit, lost at another time, now ready to surrender completely. In that moment, Jack understood that he had to transcend all his fears and inner conflicts to free himself. The shadow approached and spoke. "If you truly seek freedom, you must surrender yourself through a sacrifice of your soul." Tears welled up in Jack's eyes. He understood now. The only way out of this dark, haunting journey was to offer himself up in a sacred act of self-sacrifice. He knew that there was no way to save his life, but this path would lead him to freedom. Beyond the threshold of death, perhaps peace awaited him. Taking a deep breath, Jack closed his eyes, pushed aside all his fears and anxieties, and embraced his soul. As he did, the train came to an ethereal halt, and the world around him fell silent. In the dark void, his soul ascended toward a serene release, as if all his pain and torment had finally ended. After Jack's moment of sacrifice, the train disappeared, and he entered a new realm, a place where only peace existed, and the nightmares of his journey became nothing more than distant memories. Thus ended his terrifying journey, where a young man walking through a path of darkness and horror found the ultimate liberation in the sacrifice of his soul. If you've been captivated by Jack's journey through darkness, self-sacrifice, and liberation, don't miss out on more stories that challenge your mind and soul. Subscribe now and join us for more spine-chilling tales where every twist leads to unexpected revelations. Like, share and comment below. Tell us, what do you think lies beyond the shadows?